What if I told you that half of England is owned by the top 1%?
Companies like Blackstone, BlackRock have over $11 trillion worth of assets under management.
Companies hold 10% of Heathrow Airport, 75% of Northumbrian Water, and over 27% of the Hinkley Point C nuclear station.
We just saw the Korean National Pension Service invest 300 million to buying single family homes. That's what you call it now. It's a product. Your homes are a product which can be purchased.
So when your water rates are going up, and Ofwat are saying there's not a great deal they can do about it, and they have to make the deals, well, now we know who's taking the cream off the top.
So that would mean 13% of your taxpayer money that goes into renting these trains out will go directly into the pockets of Roscoe shareholders.
It cannot be underestimated how much power and influence companies like BlackRock have over our daily lives.
The UK has been warned that many places will be facing severe water shortages and drought in the coming years. Meanwhile, large corporations like Coca-Cola are able to extract fresh water at a very fast rate.
And that is the real effect of why services throughout this country, throughout the UK, increasingly so in the US, are going down the toilet, because everything we own is being value stripped.
That's the kind of thing that pays for private flights, pays for nice cars, luxury, diamonds, watches, gold, jewelry. Even if the UK is going through a cost of living crisis, it has never affected the royal family.
And we're getting charged through the nose for it by billionaire investors and their companies. You want to see a big disgrace? That is a huge disgrace.
Welcome back to Brit Rants, where we expose the truth they don't want you to know. You think you live in Britain? Think again. Whole chunks of this country, land, homes, water, energy, transport, aren't owned by us anymore. They're owned by billionaires, corporations, and foreign investors who don't live here, don't care, and definitely don't pay the price for their greed. Your rent, paid to a hedge fund. Your bills, going to a CEO in Dubai. Your local park might be owned by a company in Luxembourg. This isn't just inequality, it's colonization with a credit card. Today on Brit Rants, we're breaking down who actually owns the UK. And trust me, TikTok is fuming. If you're tired of feeling like a stranger in your own country, hit subscribe, because we're saying what needs to be said.
What if I told you that half of England is owned by the top 1%? And by that I mean, according to one author, Who Owns Britain, when he looked at the registration details, we're talking about 30% of the land owned by wealthy landowners like the aristocracy and the landed gentry, 18% controlled by businesses, corporations, and another 17% controlled by oligarchs and bankers. So in a situation where we already have underoccupied homes and completely vacant homes, enough to house all the homeless people in the UK, according to statistics from Shelter, then even if we build 1.5 million homes, if we don't change the ownership structure, then many people still won't be able to get homes in the first place. Perhaps we don't have a housing crisis, but we have a crisis of the distribution of wealth and power. If you'd like to learn more about how people are trying to tackle that, trying to stop a situation where private landlords can just increase your rent by 7.9% in February of this year, then see the caption down below, tap to follow, and keep up with Novo for more.
Blackstone have just acquired over £1.4 billion worth of UK housing. Their total assets under management are now over $1 trillion. Companies like Blackstone, BlackRock have over $11 trillion worth of assets under management. Just to put that into context, there's only 2 countries in the world that have more than $11 trillion of GDP. That's the US and China. It cannot be underestimated how much power and influence companies like BlackRock have over our daily lives, our daily finances, our home ownership, our stock prices, every single aspect of all of our walks of life. These companies are not democratic. They don't have to answer to anyone. They don't have to answer to any third parties. Some might even argue that they actually influence some of the largest governments in the world. Look at UK housing right now. The Labour Party have a goal to build 1.5 million UK homes. Who do you think is going to finance those? We already know they're in conversations with these massive monopolies. They're going to be working with them to build up what we call single family rental units. So those 1.5 million homes that they're building, they're not going to be building those for you and I to buy. Those homes are going to be bought by private equity companies like BlackRock, Blackstone, and they're never going to see the light of day. The keys to the doors for those properties, they're not for me and you. They're for private equity who will then rent those houses to us. So buckle up, my friends. Looks like we are well and truly entering generation rent.
China owns more of the UK than most people think. Britain's energy, water and nuclear systems are partly owned by China. If tensions rise, what happens next? Chinese state-backed companies hold 10% of Heathrow Airport, 75% of Northumbrian Water and over 27% of the Hinkley Point C nuclear station. A Chinese firm even owns the UK power networks, controlling electricity for millions in London and the South East. In 2023 alone, official data showed £4.3 billion in Chinese investments, but experts say the real figure is closer to £82 billion when hidden routes are included. Beijing also controls one of Europe's biggest battery sites in Wiltshire and owns major stakes in British steel, wind farms and telecom infrastructure. Security experts warn this isn't just business, it's potential leverage. If conflict breaks out over Taiwan, China could easily flip the switch and paralyze the lives of millions of British people. Would Britain still be in control, or would Beijing be calling the shots?
Running out of time, UK housing stock is being gobbled up by multinational corporations all across the country. We just saw the Korean National Pension Service invest 300 million to buying single family homes. That's what you call it now. It's a product. Your homes are a product which can be purchased. 300 million in buying those homes. We've seen the Canadian Pension Fund invest £1 billion last year. We've also seen BlackRock invest 1.4 billion since 2023. And even our dear old friend Hugh Grosvenor of the Grosvenor Estates had to sell £306 million worth of his estate to the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. So what we are seeing now is huge international flows of capital into buying up UK homes. And on the flip side, we have a problem. We have a big problem. I bought a block of apartments the other day for 1.5 million. The reinstatement value, so the rebuild value of those homes, if God forbid they fell down, I had to rebuild it, was £4.5 million to build that same block. And so what we've got fundamentally is an issue of actually building new homes. It's no economical sense to build new homes. And you can see that for all the biggest house builders right now, all reporting profits down, even in some cases profit losses, profit warnings. So yeah, we're not going to be building any more homes, and the homes that we do have are being gobbled up by foreign investments. And so yeah, time is running out for you to jump onto that asset ladder. And if you can, you will rise with the tide. If you can't, then let's just hope that home ownership isn't something that's important to you. And actually, to be honest with you, I don't own my own home, although we have a very substantial portfolio. So really, it's not the end of the world if you don't.
China has pumped £82 billion into the UK and controls our airports, nuclear plants, and even our water. While official data says Chinese investment in the UK was just £4.3 billion in 2023, that's probably way off the mark. Independent estimates suggest China has pumped £82 billion into Britain since 2005. That makes us their third favorite investment destinations after US and Australia. So what exactly have they bought? Chinese investors own 10% of each airport, massive chunk into our electricity network. They also own 60% of the proposed Bradwell B nuclear site in Essex. But how dangerous could this be? Some experts want Chinese law forces all companies to assist in national intelligence. Imagine if China invaded Taiwan. They could potentially sabotage our infrastructure to stop Britain imposing sanctions. Others say that's nonsense. Why would they destroy their own investment? So what do you think? Should we be worried about Chinese ownership of our vital services, or is it just scaremongering? Leave us your thoughts in the comments.
By the Crown Estate, we're talking about offices here, 1,500 square feet to let to people. Now, the Crown Estate generates revenues over £312 million per year. Some of that revenue, about 25%, goes to help fund things like the sovereign grant, about £86 million a year that King Charles and the royal family are able to use. That's the kind of thing that pays for private flights, pays for nice cars, luxury, diamonds, watches, gold, jewelry. Even if the UK is going through a cost of living crisis, it has never affected the royal family. And with the Crown Estate, we're talking about interest in oil and gas licenses for companies that are contributing to the same air pollution that chokes off the life in tens of thousands of people in the UK every single year, and people across the world. So one of the real questions is, if part of that wealth is derived from being inherited from a long line of people who just happen to be born into a particular family, then in a democracy, Why is it still happening? And could the money be better spent on the poor, on the pensioners, and on the downtrodden? Have your say down below.
The Labour Party is currently proposing to nationalise rail operators when their contracts run out. The problem is these plans don't include nationalising the rolling stock. The trains themselves will remain in the hands of the three main providers, Angel Trains, Eversholt and Porter Brook. From 2012 to 2020, rolling stock companies paid out £2.7 billion in dividends to their owners. These companies transfer 13% of their lease charges into profit. So that would mean 13% of your taxpayer money that goes into renting these trains out will go directly into the pockets of Roscoe shareholders. And get this, Angel Trains is registered to the tax haven of Jersey, and their majority shareholder is registered in Luxembourg. Same goes for Eversholt's majority shareholder, and the same goes for one of Porter Brook's three majority shareholders. So after extorting 13% of the rents they charge the taxpayer as profits, most of these profits won't even be taxed in the UK. Is the policy a step in the right direction? Yes. But does it go far enough? Absolutely not.
This train to Liverpool is owned by the Dutch government. This train to Manchester is part owned by the Italian government. And this London Overground train is owned by the German and Hong Kong governments. Why are these British trains owned by the British people? Then all the profits would go back to us to cut fares and improve services. With public ownership, our trains would be run by us and for us. Because don't you think it's weird that
100 billion. That's how much Qatari nationals and Qatari state-owned entities have bought of UK assets since 2008. They've produced over $1.2 trillion worth of returns from those assets that they've acquired. So if a foreign national, as Qatar, can make 1.3 trillion from the assets that they have acquired in the UK, why can't we, as the UK, own our own assets and reveal that kind of revenue for our own country? We spend so much time blaming our landlords, our neighbours, other members of our society about owning homes or taking homes off the market for others. But we are blind and oblivious to the hundreds of billions of pounds that are invested into this country as we continue to be asset stripped and all of the revenues taken out of our country and away from the welfare state and for the good of our people. So if you want to get rich, and that's kind of your goal and that's your thing, fair enough. But it's going to be very difficult unless you're working with these institutions and providing them ultimately with opportunities. It might not be directly with them. There might be many layers to ultimately you get to that place. But ultimately, it is foreign nationals acquiring our assets that we're all working for. And so maybe it's time that we restricted foreign investment into this country, foreign asset stripping of this country, and start focusing on our own people and supporting one another, becoming more entrepreneurial and rebuilding our own asset base.
It is a big sign that a country is finished when it is cheaper for you to travel and get accommodation abroad than it is for you to stay in the country that you live in and do a staycation. This is the price of a return train journey from London to Newcastle, £193.20. And if you want to go first class and be a piece fancy, over £300 to stay in the UK, man, to stay in the UK. However, if you want a return flight from the UK, London, to Milan, Italy, for the same dates, it's going to cost you as little as £105. The fastest, 189. So even their most expensive flights, obviously, I don't know about first class and that, but some of the most expensive flights are still cheaper than a regular train from London to Newcastle. Tell me how that makes sense. Those times back in the day when people used to be like, can't afford to go on holiday this year. I'm just going to do a staycation with the family. It's over. Staycations are more expensive than the holiday. Just go on the holiday. Do you know what I mean? The holiday is now the cheaper option. Leaving the country is the cheaper option. Is it making sense? No wonder people in the UK are so upset. We can't even afford to be here. Do you get it? We can't even afford to be here. But if ever I've seen signs that a country wants those who live in the country to leave, this is it, right? Like, surely.
Even if we build more houses, that might not fix the housing crisis. That's what experts think, given that already just 5% of the total amount of homes are owned by homeowners. Most of them are owned by corporations and members of the aristocracy, like the royal family, but dukes and duchesses. we have to talk about the fact that almost half of Britain is owned by the richest 1%. Within that people, the average person is worth over £3 million. The 50 richest families in the UK control the same amount of wealth as half of the population. That's 33 million people. They're the ones that we're competing with when it comes to home ownership. It means that they're able to buy more land, more homes, and also dictate by way of their control in shares and ownership of corporations that dominate the housing sector. But what do you think? Given that there's already so many underoccupied homes, so many empty second homes, we probably already have enough resources to fix the housing crisis today. But that would require a serious redistribution of wealth and power. And if you'd like to find out how people are going about that, then see the caption down below.
Is BlackRock. BlackRock is an asset manager. What is an asset manager? An asset manager is an organization that acquire assets. An asset, therefore, is something that can be infrastructure, it can be stocks, it can be real estate, but typically it's something that will provide a consistent and low risk yield. Yield is an income stream, right? So what asset managers like BlackRock have been doing recently is moving out of the stock market and buying infrastructure. For instance, when Macquarie bought Thames Water, when, for instance, BlackRock buys Gatwick Airport, or, for instance, what's going to look like it's going to happen as we've now broken up the farms and UK duty inheritance tax changes, BlackRock entering into farmland within the UK, or, for instance, its recent acquisition of 1.4 billion homes in the northeast of England. When they start to buy up these assets, because they're not interested in generational preservation, they're only interested in a short-termism, depending on how long their fund is, might be 10 years, might be 20 years, whatever it might be. It means that these asset managers are not incentivized to invest long-term, generational periods of time into these assets, which is so vital to the generational survival of our countries and of our society. Take, for instance, an airport. An asset manager is looking to invest as little as possible into that infrastructure, but while taking out as much yield, as much rent as possible. So what seems to happen, which is why we had such terrible situation with Thames Water, why, for instance, we just had the recent situation with Heathrow, is that fundamentally private equity firms do not want to invest long-term into these assets to ensure the fact that they're performing at maximum capacity. What they're trying to do is put in the least amount of investment to get the greatest amount of return out. And it's not before long that while we pay for more, we get less and less and less. It's called value stripping. And that is the real effect of why services throughout this country, throughout the UK, increasingly so in the US, are going down the toilet because everything we own is being value stripped.
Rachel Reeves, who's suddenly all smiles at the podium, beaming like she's just solved the nation's problems. Let's be honest though, she's the literal human face today of a government that's fake, manufactured, and under the surface, rotting with desperation. We're once again watching the NHS being handed over to the private sector on a silver platter. The government unveiled a 29 billion elective reform plan. But here's the catch. It's not really about fixing the NHS. It's about selling it off bit by bit. Where exactly is that 29 billion coming from? Good question, right? Because with national debt topping 2.9 trillion and tax burdens already at a 70-year high, this money isn't falling from the sky. What's likely? Borrowing or slicing money away from elsewhere. Either way, you will pay. Now the official line, they're calling it a partnership with the private sector to reduce waiting lists because we've now got 6.4 million people waiting for 7.5 million treatments. That's not just a backlog, that's a health crisis. But instead of reinvesting in staff, beds and public care, infrastructure, Labour's answer is outsourcing, while they stand in front of the very people they are selling out. Prime Minister Keir Starmer stood grinning, actually said he welcomed the expansion of NHS private sector cooperation. And for anyone who dares criticise this, he says, I make no apologies. And then there's Wes Streeting, our health secretary, who said, and I quote, we're not going to have a something for nothing culture in the NHS. Now, where have we heard that sort of language before? Oh yes, the Tory playbook. He called the NHS a service, not a shrine, that it needs to get used to money being tight. And it's funny, isn't it, how the money's only tight when it comes to healthcare, but never when it's for corporate contracts, MPs' expenses, or wars overseas. Because this isn't reform, this is privatisation, dressed up in buzzwords like efficiency and partnership. But Reform UK are the problem, apparently. It isn't reform selling your NHS out, it's the people accusing them of it while doing it behind your back, and you just can't see it. Under this new deal, 2.5 million NHS patients a year could now be handed over to the private sector. It's being sold as a solution to the backlog, but let's not kid ourselves. Once the door is open, it rarely closes, and Labour opened it in 2003. And you know what the worst part is? They'll blame you, your missed appointment, your bad lifestyle, your expectations, never the decades of deliberate underfunding, fragmentation, or the chronic mismanagement from both red and blue rosettes. So the next time someone says Labour are the party of the NHS, just remind them of this moment. But like the PFI of 2003, Labour voters seem to have some very good blinkers when they need them. Because a day really does make a difference, and under Labour, it looks like the NHS we knew is on borrowed time. And so is the Chancellor.
So this is quite controversial and it's quite alarming, but the Bank of England might actually spark the next financial market sell-off. And let me explain how and why investors are starting to panic. The other day I was just reading the news and I stumbled across something very worrying. The Bank of England is actively selling government bonds. Now that could be doing more harm than good. Now, to be clear, this is part of quantitative tightening, where the Bank of England is reversing or undoing years of stimulus by selling the government bonds that it bought during the 2008 financial crisis and the COVID era. But here's the issue. Unlike the Fed in the US or the ECB, which are just letting the bonds naturally mature, the Bank of England is actively selling these bonds or gilts onto the market. And that could add a ton of pressure on long-term borrowing costs. Now, fund managers are warning that if the Bank of England doesn't slow down, especially later on this year, then they could reignite a bond market sell-off. Now, why is that? Well, the market has to absorb too much supply, especially during a time where demand is already shaky. UK's 30-year bond yields are over 5%, the highest in any G7 nation. And that's painful for governments, for businesses, for homeowners, basically anyone who's borrowing money. And get this, the Bank of England plans to ramp up sales from £13 billion to £50 billion next year. And investors are saying this isn't a normalization strategy anymore. It's destabilizing. And even some people within the Bank of England admit that quantitative tightening and interest rate policy are pulling in opposite directions. One's lowering rates and the other's tightening financial conditions. And the bottom line is, if the Bank of England keeps selling gilts aggressively, then that could cause yields to spike even more, which could hurt the economy, increase the cost of government debt, and ironically undo their own monetary policy. But as always, I'm interested to hear your thoughts, so drop them in the comments below. Do you think the Bank of England should slow down on quantitative tightening?
Oh my God. Have you heard about this? This pair have just sold the government's remaining shares in NatWest and confirmed a loss of £10.5 billion to the expense of, yes, the taxpayer. The government rescued the bank back in 2008 when they were basically gambling with people's mortgages. And let's face it, they fooked it right up. And the government at the time stepped in to bail them out by filling order books, buying shares and whatever else was needed. But they did it with our money. And now this pair have just sold off the remaining shares in NatWest at a loss of £10.5 billion. How are people this financially irresponsible allowed to run one of the biggest economies in the entire world? I mean, seriously. And they're losing money every day faster than they are making it. Do they believe that the country's finances are in a bottomless piggy bank? But the joke of this is, this lady said, and I quote, "We protected the economy 17 years ago, and that was the right decision. But now we are focusing on securing Britain's future in a new era of global change." Really? So you're doing that by starting off with a £10.5 billion loss to our public finances? Securing Britain's future? Seriously, take a chuffing day off.
Severn Trent Water, BlackRock and the Qatar Investment Authority. Thames Water, the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, and the Chinese Investment Corporation. Northumbrian Water, fully owned by CK Hutchinson's Holdings from the Cayman Islands. That's owned by a billionaire from Hong Kong. Yorkshire Water, Gateway HK and Wharfdale, Hong Kong. And GIC in Singapore, and they own 88% of Yorkshire Water. Anglian Water, IFM Global Infrastructure from Australia, and the Canada Pension Plan Investment Fund. Southern Water, Macquarie Asset Management from Australia, and JP Morgan Chase. Wessex Water, they are 100% owned by YTL Group in Malaysia. United Utilities, Lazard Asset Management Limited, Global, and Vanguard. And Southwest Water Group, Lazard Asset Management. So when your water rates are going up, and Ofwat are saying there's not a great deal they can do about it, and they have to make the deals, well, now we know who's taking the cream off the top. 72 billion's been lifted. And is it any surprise that it's global asset management companies? Not a single one of them based in the UK. And across the full spectrum, that's 70% of it all that they own. So when Ofwat come on the news and they say that money's been taken from directors as bonuses and dividends, it's those big companies. So 70% of your bill and the increase, that's where it's going. Ofwat meant to be on our side, making the billionaires richer. It's time that Ofwat's duties went out to tender yearly and start protecting the consumer, because we know that the water's turning to shite and we're getting charged through the fucking nose for it by billionaire investors and their companies. You want to see a big disgrace? That is a huge fucking disgrace.
Did you know that Coca-Cola uses billions of litres of water in the UK every single year? In fact, just a single can uses around 1.9 litres of water to produce. And in addition to that, did you know that Coca-Cola is one of several private companies that has the right to extract millions of litres of water from the ground? For example, over 1 billion litres of water in Sidcup, Kent. At the same time, the UK has been warned that many places will be facing severe water shortages and drought in the coming years. In fact, several areas in the south of England will face water stress by 2030. Despite that, various water companies, many of whom are billions of pounds in debt, are telling customers that they need to use less water. Meanwhile, large corporations like Coca-Cola are able to extract fresh water at a very fast rate. What do you think? If you'd like to learn more, then read the caption down below and follow Nova.
Who are the families that own Central and West London? Now, a lot of people may not know this, but since the 16th century, a large portion of prime Central London have been owned by a handful of families who have inherited properties for generations. And I'm talking old money. Now, a lot of these families I'm about to mention, their ancestors were dukes, earls, barons, and baronesses. And a lot of them have inherited these titles. And most of them have been able to maintain their wealth through these large property estates, which have been passed down from generation to generation. Firstly, you have the Grosvenor estates, which include parts of Mayfair and Belgravia. Now, this was inherited by the Grosvenor family. Now, the family holds a dukedom. This guy here, Hugh Grosvenor, is the Duke of Westminster. And it's estimated that he and his family are worth £9.42 billion. Now, secondly, you have the Cardigan estate, which lies roughly adjacent to the Grosvenor estate. So it's owned by the Cardigan family. Now, this family's entry into wealth is a very interesting story. So back in the day, a man by the name of General Charles Cadogan married Elizabeth Sloane. Now, through this marriage, the Sloane estates entered the Cadogan family, which has continued to generate them income up till today. And when you deep it, it's mad. This marriage happened in 1717. Yeah. And up till now, the family's still making money off, the Sloane estates, of these estates. Crazy. Thirdly, you have the Howard the Walden estate. Now, this estate is controlled directly and indirectly by members of the Howard the Walden family. Now, this estate consists of the eastern part of Marylebone, running from Marylebone High Street in the west, all the way to Portland Place in the east. It also comprises of Harley Street, which is known for private medicine. So yeah, the Howard the Walden family, very, very rich and very, very silent. Now, at number 4, you have the Portman Estates, which is owned by the Portman family. Now, back in the day, in 1532, they bought into this area. And this was 200 years before the beginning of its development in the Georgian period. The estate is held in a family trust with over 130 beneficiaries. I couldn't really find any mentions of their net worth online, but 2 articles from 1999 from The Guardian and The Independent stated that their net worth was 275 million. So you can only imagine where it is now. For more content like this, make sure to follow Faster Speaks. And let me know if you want a part 2.
This country's been sold off, bit by bit, pound by pound, until there's nothing left for the people who actually live here. And what do we get in return? Unaffordable homes, soaring bills, and a government that lets it all happen because they profit from it too. The UK isn't broken by accident. It's been carved up, auctioned off, and gutted for cash, while we're told to tighten our belts. It's time to call it what it is: economic betrayal. If you're done watching your country get sold to the highest bidder, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's take the conversation back.